Durham's Nothing But Truth on AFR Talk.
Welcome back. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth, proudly on AFR Talk. And we are broadcasting live from the NRB and Nashville, Music City. To my left, but certainly with me on the right, is one of my mentors. He was on one of my first shows ever, way back when I was doing cable access, in fact. He came out, and he's sold millions of books, and he has educated members of Congress on history, called America's Historian. It's someone I looked at, and I remember how he was being treated when he got into the ring. He went into the ring 3 times and gave Dick Gephardt his lowest margin of victory ever, and they waged a personal war against him. You see what's happening now with the IRS and people speaking up? Well, this man experienced that, and not only survived it, conquered it in the way of getting the message out. Bill Federer, welcome back. How are you, buddy?
Great to be with you.
Great to be with you. And, okay, well, where to begin? And
well, this book
yes.
is called Change to Chains. It's the 6,000-year quest for global control. And in a nutshell, people say America's the greatest country in the world. I decided to prove it. So I spent a year researching every civilization that's ever existed on planet Earth. And I found some interesting things. The first human records appeared about 3,000 or 4,000 BC. Sumerian cuneiform on clay tablets in the Mesopotamian Valley, Iraq, and Egyptian hieroglyphics on papyrus, where we get the word paper. Now, 4,000 BC, 2080, that's 6,000 years. And in a sense, that's not that long. 6,000 years is just 60 people living 100 years each, back to back, right? I mean, we're talking 60 grandmas. I mean, everybody's met someone who's lived 100 years, maybe. You know, and so
I love that.
You're all the way back. And now the question is, what is the most common form of government in all 6,000 years? Well, let's see. There's pharaohs, Caesars, Kaisers, Sultans, Tsars, Maharaja, Genghis Khan, Julius Caesar, Attila the Hun. It's dictatorship, monarchy, right? Power, like gravity, wants to concentrate into the hands of one person. That is the default setting for human government. It's a pecking order, right? And so if you're friends with the king, now I believe it goes back to the fall in the garden, Cain killing Abel, selfishness coming into the human DNA. And so you have some babies in a playpen. One of them will wind up taking the rattle from the others. Put some kids on a playground. One of them winds up being the bully hogging the ball. Drop some people in the woods. One of them winds up being the Indian chief. Drop them in an inner city. One of them winds up being the gang leader. And so it's sort of like the Lord of the Rings. Everyone wants this ring of power. And it's a dynamic where if you are friends with the king, you are more equal. If you are not friends with the king or the gang leader or the chief, you are less equal. And if you're an enemy of the king, you're dead. It's called treason. So for most of world history, equality was how close of an orbit can you get to the king? Now, what is rare in history is people getting an opportunity to experiment in ruling themselves without a king. And so I combed through history and I thought, where is the first nation to rule itself without a king that we have real records of is Israel. Around 1500 BC, they come out of Egypt, they come into the promised land, and for the first 200 or 300 years, they do not have a king. Everyone is equal before the law. There's no respect of persons in judgment, male, female, made in the image of the Creator. Even the stranger living amongst them is under the same law that they're under. I mean, you compare that to Sharia law. The stranger is a dhimmi status and has no rights.
Explain that real quick, because some people, dhimmi status.
Dhimmi. It is a second-class status for non-Muslims living in Muslim countries. Very similar to the Jim Crow laws and black codes that were passed in the Democrat South after the Civil War, right? Lincoln freed the slaves. Democrats started the KKK. But the freed slaves were there, right? The African Americans, but they were treated as second-class citizens. That is a dhimmi status, and that's the way Christians are treated in Muslim countries today. Anyway, so you go back in history, and Israel is the first nation with the concept of equality. Right? The other countries, you're more equal if you're friends with the king. In Israel, these first 300 years, they did not have a king. Everyone was equal before the law. This is the beginning of the very concept of equality, the beginning of the concept of the individual. Second, Israel had no police because everybody in the country enforced the law. They had no military because every male was in the military. They had a bureaucracy-free welfare system, right? You harvested the land. You left the gleanings for the poor people to go through. And they had no prisons because it was swift judgment with the elders at the gate. And, of course, a city of refuge you could run to if you needed to. And then Israel is the first country with private land ownership. right? All those boring chapters where they did surveys and lots and divided up the land and don't move the ancient boundary marker between their property. And my mom's name is Tirzah, and the first mention of Tirzah in the Bible is she was the daughter of Zelophehad, this old guy who had no sons. The girls go to Moses and says, hey, you're dividing up the land. Don't we get any? Is our dad's name going to be forgotten? And Moses said, you get land, just marry someone within your tribe. This was unheard of. Individual women getting land, individual families, where in Egypt, the Pharaoh controlled all the land. In Mesopotamia, the kings did. Most of the cuneiform tablets is the king keeping track of what he controlled. And then in China, there's 18 major dynasties over 5,000 years. The emperor controlled it. Even if you had land in Egypt, it was conditional on you staying on the good side of the Pharaoh. You get on his bad side, he'll take your land and your life. Well, in Israel, there was no king. The land was permanently titled to the families. And if they got in a pinch and sold it, every 50 years it came back. Now, if you can own land, you can accumulate sheep and cattle and crops, and you can be in a position to lend and not have to borrow. The Bible called it being blessed. Karl Marx called it being a capitalist. Right? You got capital, you got stuff, you saved it, you worked hard. Now, the whole Israeli system that had maximum individual liberty was dependent on one thing: the priests teaching the law. So human nature, the pull is for this dictator to happen. So the priests had to teach them this counter-human nature system. And as long as they did it, it functioned fine. But as the priests stopped doing it and every man did what was right in his own eyes, then they, had Eli sleeping with the women in the tabernacle of meeting. You had the Levite with a concubine, shoves her out the door. She gets raped by sodomites all night long. I mean, these horrible chapters. And it says everyone does what's right in their own eyes. The people go to Samuel the prophet, and they said, you know what? We want to be like all the other countries. We want a king. And Samuel cries, and the Lord said, they did not reject you, they rejected me. And so God's perfect plan for Israel was to not have a king, everyone own private property, everyone be equal and be blessed. And so it's a spectrum of power. One side's total government, the other side's no government. So one side's a black hole, and it sucks the light and gravity into this Pharaoh building cities for the dead. The other side is anarchy. Everyone has their own law, right? Unless the people have morals and virtues. And so we look at other different examples throughout history, but a people ruling themselves is dependent on the people having morals and values. And when they don't, they give into their passions and lusts, and there's crises, and the government ends up taking control, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
So you've just described, in a nutshell, as much as I can understand, and you've done it brilliantly because I think I can, statism versus what we have in a constitutional republic and the recognition where our rights come from, God. Mm-hmm. And that is what we're looking at, because statism, inevitably dictatorship, you're going to have, and with the other, you have the law. Now, the other side of that is anarchy completely, and I guess
so that's where the libertarian
yes.
concept, the flaw is that they don't want to get involved in moral issues, right? And so for there to be order in society without a strong central government, you need to counterbalance it by the people having moral internal values. And so to just throw it open and say, oh, people give in to your passions and lusts, then it's going to be chaos. Plato, if I have another minute or two.
You have the time, brother. Go.
So we talked about Israel, and when I speak in schools, I make it easy for the kids. I say, hold up a fist in one hand and say concentrated power. Hold up an open palm with your fingers apart in the other hand, say separated power, then go back to the fist, concentrated power. In other words, that's world history. For most of world history, power is in the hands of the kings, pharaohs, Caesars, Kaisers, sultans, and czars. Every now and then, a group of people get a chance to stretch the rubber band, put the power in the hands of the people, but in times of crises, the rubber band snaps back. So, 600 BC, Athens has a king named Draco, and it's the death penalty for every other thing, so his laws are called draconian laws. All right,
there you go.
And so Athens gets rid of him, they get a new king named Solon. And Solon, S-O-L-O-N, Solon invented democracy and left town, so they had to do it. And in a democracy, everybody every day had to go to the market and talk politics. And if you did not keep up with politics every day in Athens, you were called an idiotus. An idiot. They don't know what's going on. Now, this is interesting. If there's an emperor or a king and you have an agenda, you got to get in to see the guy. And so in China, they had an emperor with 2,000 concubines and these Mandarin eunuchs that kept them, but they were the doorkeepers. So if you wanted to get in, you had to bribe these mandarins with money or favors just to get in. In Athens, there was no emperor or king. The people's made a decision. Well, if you have an agenda, how do you lobby the entire city? That's when they invented theater. They had amphitheaters to get everybody together. They would have comedies and tragedies where they would ridicule some points of view and extol and honor others. And from that time till now, theater is always political in a country where the people make the decisions.
This is, because what you just heard me describe, the cartoonish area of politics, of coverage, of spin, of everything else, and where it goes to, the theater, and winning the hearts and minds, and the breakdown of, just real quick, with ads for political ads, we have 2/3 to 1/3 emotional appeals versus rational appeals, respectively. So the idea is, I'm going to get you emotionally. I'm going to capture you. And I think we're seeing that right now.
And that actually came from Greece. So to be a good king, all you got to do is kill and inspire fear, right? Everybody's afraid of you. They do what you say. Right. And in Athens, with this invention of a democracy, the people, you have to persuade them. You do it through theater, but they invented something called rhetoric. Mm-hmm. Three things: ethos, logos, and pathos. Ethos, where we get the word ethics, but that's basically the reputation of the person that is doing the speaking. Mm-hmm. So is this person got all kinds of degrees? You take what they say more serious. If this person's off the street, he hasn't done anything, then you take it less serious. So that's the ethos part. The logos is logic, which the Republicans are good for, right? And then there's pathos, which is passion. So if you're trying to sway the public, you get people with reputations, right? And you have them logical, but then you get this passion where you want to get them involved. And so these are tools of persuasion that were developed in Athens. Now, an interesting guy that lived in Athens during this time was named Plato, Plato, and he said the city government in Athens would go through 5 stages. The first stage he called rule of the capable. Lovers of truth, lovers of principle. These are guys that know how to run farms and businesses, and they know how to run city governments. They're just responsible guys. They do a good job, the city grows, and the second group is what Plato called lovers of honor, lovers of fame, a Timocracy, T-I-M-ocracy, lovers of honor and fame. And these are people that maybe they're a Greek actor and they got famous, or a Greek Olympic athlete, or maybe a busybody, or a battle hero, and they go into politics, right, with the best of intentions, but the fact of the matter is they have never run anything. Maybe like a Hollywood action figure that gets elected governor of California. I mean, what did the governor run before he became governor? Really nothing. He was just famous. Now, the famous people, they love to be honored and they hate to be dishonored. And so now you can manipulate them through public opinion, through the theater, through praising them, or they had comedies and tragedies, they'd ridicule and they'd buffoon, and then they'd honor and extol. Where the first group, they're principled lovers of truth. They don't sway. This second group, they'll sway because they love being honored. Now, because they have no experience running anything, Plato says they cannot resist the temptation to take just a little money out of the city treasury and pad their retirement. And so they vote some money for their friends and their brother-in-law's construction company, and then they funnel money to supporters that can get it back into their campaign, and it turns into a third category called an oligarchy, an insider clique, a ruling class where they pass laws that everybody has to obey except themselves. They exempt themselves. They raise taxes on everybody else, but they don't have to pay the taxes. And the people get upset at this oligarchy. They vote the bums out. They set up a democracy, and this is great. Is this okay?
This is awesome.
And so Plato says that a democracy is known by tolerance. So you got lovers of principle, lovers of fame, and then lovers of money. And then the next is lovers of tolerance. So he says a democracy is the most charming form of government. It's like a bazaar where you can pick out any viewpoint, like an embroidery patchwork. But he says then they begin to tolerate more things like convicts walking down the street and nobody cares. People doing crimes, nobody cares. They just tolerate it all. And then he says this anarchy creeps into the family and the sons are disobedient to the fathers. And then it creeps into their morality. And get this, he says they yield to unnecessary pleasures like incest and unnatural union. And that's the last stage before this democracy crumbles. They see the pot of city treasury money sitting there. And they don't have deferred gratification, save now, pay. They want it now. They want their pleasures now. And so they raid the city treasury, spread the wealth around. Now there's no money left. They say, where's the money? The rich people. They vote to take the money from the rich people. There's no rich left. Now there's a shortage of money. They begin to bicker and can have anarchy and chaos, and they begin fighting. And they begin to say, can't someone come along and fix this mess? That's the fifth stage. Someone comes along. They're all smiles. They promise everything to everybody. They salute and greet everyone on the street. They're very eloquent. They're very charismatic. And as people begin to trust this person and yield their rights, their freedom, their money, their power, he yields to his selfish side, and he concentrates power, and he uses the power of his government to target his political opponents with false accusations. They get drug away and killed. Finally, he stands in the chariot of state, holding the reins of power, and he is revealed as the tyrant. So Plato says democracy without virtue, without morality, always ends in chaos, out of which a tyrant arises. So back to the Israel model. Israel, as long as the priests were teaching morals and virtues, they could have freedom, but when they stopped teaching it, they gave into their passions and lusts, and there's crisis. Plato said the same thing. I couldn't believe it. And we're getting a little side here. So Plato's describing democracy, and he says the manner of democrats, that's literally the way he worded it, the manner of democrats is that everyone does what is right in their own eyes. I thought that's exactly the wording that it was, in the book of Samuel that talked about Israel. Everyone did what was right because the priests weren't teaching them what was right. Okay, I'm out of time.
Okay, well, here's the deal. Now, I'm going to post Bill's latest book on a Facebook post. And then if you want more of Bill Federer to come back on with me later on this week or sometime in the near future and do a few segments, maybe an hour, because I do. Okay, I'm just telling you right now, it's going to happen, period. But bottom line, check out Bill Federer's book. What we just got was extraordinary, and we are blessed because of it. Bill Federer, thank you.
Crane.
Great to be with you.
You're tremendous.
Absolutely. God bless. And coming up, Todd Starnes, Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth, live from the NRB.